So let's get started now with our fifth panel discussion, which will examine applying artificial intelligence in industry. It's my great pleasure to introduce our moderator for this morning's panel, Dr. John Licato. Dr. Licato is an assistant professor in the Computer Science and Engineering Department at USF and the founder and director of the Advancing Machine and Human Reasoning AMHR lab. He was awarded the 2015 AFOSR Young Investigators Program Award, and in 2017, he moved to USF CSE department and established the AMHR lab. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, John, who will introduce the panel speakers, facilitate the discussion, and lead the Q&A session. Please, John.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Adib. So, yeah, as Adib mentioned, I'm a professor of computer science and engineering here at USF, and I direct an AI research lab. But recently, I've been dipping my toes into the industry world through a startup company, and that's why part of why I'm so excited to be able to present this amazing panel of experts, talk about some issues in the intersection of AI and industry. So I'm happy to introduce, starting with Leslie Babich, who's been the director of SOFWERX Tampa since October 2020. She has 20 plus years of special operations experience in the Air Force Special Operations Command. She's held various leadership positions, including Squadron Command, Director of the Commander's Action Group at Headquarters, Air Force Special Operations Command, and Commander Joint Special Operations Air Component Central, among many other positions and appointments. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you.
Next to her, Todd Borkey is the EVP and CTO of Huntington Ingalls. HII designs and builds nuclear aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, and surface combatants. HII also provides engineering services where it manages nearly $1 billion of DoD RDT&E annually. And Todd founded the HII AI campaign in 2018, and today they're ranked by GovWin as a top AI provider. Hi, Todd. Dr. Peter Yu is a Regents Professor of Law and Communication and Director of the Center for Law and Intellectual Property at the Texas A&M University School of Law. He's an expert in many areas, including intellectual property, international law, and international trade. And finally, Jags Kandasamy is the co-founder and CEO of Latent AI. He's a serial entrepreneur, exiting his previous company to a New York Stock Exchange traded public company. He's currently an industry commissioner on the Atlantic Council Commission on Software-Defined Warfare and serves as an advisor and mentor to startup founders and transitioning veterans. Welcome to you all. So let's start with a broad question for all four of you so we can get a better picture of your individual perspectives. AI, right? We've heard that term quite a bit over the past few days and past 2 years especially. And it seems every organization is trying to figure out how to integrate what they consider to be AI into every aspect of their operations. So let's start with you, Leslie, and then we'll go down the line. How has your organization handled this AI mania, and what lessons have you learned?
All right, so good morning, and thank you so much for having me here. So let me tell you kind of my perspective. I'm not an industry partner. I am former military, so my goal and my job at SOFWERX is to help SOCOM, Special Operations Command, find companies that can solve the challenges that they're facing. And some of their requirements and desirements are to identify artificial intelligence capabilities to help them execute their mission. And so when I am taking a look at AI, it's various different applications, all the way from predictive maintenance to how do you better automate and identify personnel and resources to go downrange for a deployment. So it's, again, and I'm not the technical expert. I'm not an engineer. So I'm taking a look at this more from a practical application perspective. And how do we, when we engage with companies that want to provide solutions to SOCOM, how do we best identify, where they're getting their data from? What applications is this going to go to? How are they building their models? How can they integrate with the systems and data systems that already exist within the military, in particular SOCOM? So a wide variety of applications. Again, we're not focused on just one thing.
So I'm not a scientist. I'm a paranoid systems engineer. And maybe Dr. Martell would like that. We've been working on AI since 2017, mostly to harvest time. It was a disruptive opportunity at the moment to get rid of millions of hours of wasted time all across our clients. And now at HAI, we're going to be pointing it at the shipyards. So we were an early mover. We saw the vision models in 2017. We saw it as an incredible opportunity to get rid of empty frames in full motion video quickly and distill information to analysts, saving hours a day in their shifts. But when NLP happened in 2018, the precision and the scale, we saw natural language processing as a real revolution. And by 2019, we were ingesting 20 million records a day in foreign content and mapping human terrain for a client. So it's the insights that you get that otherwise humans could never get to. Indeed, humans are on the loop. Everything we do has humans in the loop, but we are recovering time in unprecedented ways. So I'm taking that technology now and pointing it at our shipyards to diagnose those shipyards. We have 36,000 people making ships. If I can make all of them operate 2% more effectively, it saves massive amounts of money, and it makes my client very happy who wants more and more submarines and ships every year. So we're really pivoting to now trying to harvest time internally. We were a broad applier. I should say we had a lot of diversity in the applications of AI. We almost, in every modality of sensing, we deployed neural network approaches and outperformed conventional DSP practices and radars and EOIR and SAR. AI is a much better processing methodology. And now with some of the ray trace algorithms, the ability to generate synthetic data, if you have limited labeled data sets and you can use high quality ray tracing technology to generate synthetic data, we can prepare those algorithms for all the different look angles and get performant models very, very quickly. So this is kind of our new focus. But frankly, I tell this story, we've been working in AI since 2017, and when we went to reInvent in 2023, we all got a whiplash when we saw what Gen AI was doing. So now Gen AI, we're all trying to get our heads around it. It has incredible opportunities. I mean, functional co-pilots everywhere, getting 70% effective first drafts. We have 15,000 work instructions every day operative in our shipyards. We write 90,000 to 100,000 work instructions to build an aircraft carrier. If I can get those 70% right the first try, that's revolutionary. I don't know where we're going to get, but we're going to try. But the more exciting thing also I'll leave with generative AI is the potential for enterprise twins. Imagine a world today where my physical assets, whether it's my fleet of trucks, a satellite constellation, an AOR, but imagine if every place my trucks are, what's in them, who's driving them, what they were trained on, what their payload is, what their next destination is, can be sampled millions of times, well, thousands of times a day, and I can combine that with all my document side of my information side of my business, and I can make my current physical enterprise searchable. I can get all types of new insights into constraints that were unprecedented. So again, it's a revolution in the harvesting of time. I'll wrap up with, I think, so Gen AI, we're now all in and trying to understand what we can do with automating first drafts and where they're going to be effective at saving time. We are already using large language models to do unprecedented things like detecting narratives in real time that are indications of a safety risk, forensically understanding quality defects in free space text that was previously never really searchable. We're getting insights into how things operate at the enterprise level in an unprecedented way. So that's where we are. Thank you.
So I teach. We have been struggling trying to figure out whether we should introduce more AI or preventing people from introducing AI, right? So I know many of you are coming from USF, so I think I'll share with you some of the lessons I've learned in the past 2 years. I think the first one is that it's very hard to strike the balance. There are both benefits and drawbacks, as we have heard from the last 2 days about all different things. We are trying to make sure that we are preparing our students ready for the AI environment. But at the same time, we also don't want students to get unfair advantage, right? We focus a lot of discussion about cheating, about other things, but I think the bigger issue is actually unfair advantage, right? If some students were able to use AI better to do the homework or to learn or to do other things, other students will be behind, right? So how we can actually level the playing field in the educational environment. I think the second lesson we learned is basically about how time-consuming and how many resources we need to actually adapt to a new environment. And unfortunately, we are in a race where the students will actually do better than the professors in trying to learn the new technology. And I think it's going to be highly challenging. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we're still talking about how to teach some of our colleagues, they'll probably hate me for saying this, teach them how to do the unmute button. Imagine trying to get them to understand generative AI. Right, so that's going to be challenging in the environment and trying to figure out. And I think the biggest difficulty for us, even for such a big university as Texas A&M, is that we need to provide time and resources for the professors to learn the technology. And we just don't have that type of resources and that type of time to actually allow them to do that. And so they have to be able to adapt very quickly, and the students are actually adapting more quickly than the professors. Right? And the last thing I'll end on is that we don't know exactly how long the discussion will continue about generative AI or about AI in general. Think about the pandemic, right? We have so many conferences about the pandemic, nobody wants to talk about that anymore. I still have colleagues who are now preparing new studies, and they couldn't find conferences to present. And I suspect that with the hype going further away, as Dr. Mattel just talked about early on, we have different expectations about LLMs, and eventually some of those conferences will go away. And yet, we still have a lot of issues that we actually need to learn more about, we need to figure out, right? How can we have a sustained discussion about the application of AI and the challenges we face?
Thank you. So, as a startup, our organization is helping other companies, other customers move AI models rapidly to edge and tactical devices, right? Like our biggest customer is Department of Defense. How do we get some of the operational use cases deployed in a short amount of time rather than taking years and years of deployment time? So with that focus, we first understand and ask the customer a question, is that problem can be solved by other means other than AI? Right? If it is a simple statistical regression, as Dr. Martello was talking about, if it is regression, let's just solve it with regression or some rule-based algorithm and be done. Only when you deal with the 3 V's of big data, right? Like probably everybody knows this: the velocity, the volume, and the variety of data that's hitting you. When that is an issue, is when you start to apply AI and to solve those problems, right? So that's what we approach. We've had instances and examples of customers, over the last few years where an automotive supplier, a tier 1 company, comes in and they want to start their journey with reinforcement learning, right? Like reinforcement learning is where you're having the model retrained by itself and at the deployed inference side and trying to make sense of things. If you haven't done anything with AI, starting there, it's like trying to do a PhD program when you're in kindergarten. Right, that's basically how that customer was thinking. Another one, like folks that think they can do everything in-house and try to do research instead of solving for business use cases. Like Todd was talking earlier, right? Like recovering man hours. That's a huge advantage from a business point of view. Instead of that, like, oh, I've got a research job, I'm going to research the heck out of it and prove myself smart, rather than trying to achieve what the business wants. So those are the things that we look and we educate our customers along the way. So,
yeah, I think that's really helpful to keep in mind, and that makes me think of so for example, there's probably a lot of people with startups and maybe larger companies in the audience and online listening, and I think what would be helpful to them is maybe talking a little bit about what not to do when integrating AI in their organization. So, Dr. Martel gave a really good piece of advice, essentially paraphrasing, but don't ignore the importance of robust, well-grounded measurements for your AI systems, right? So let me ask all 4 of you then, what advice would you have on what not to do when introducing new AI-based technology into your organization or proposing it to a DoD agency? Yeah.
Okay. So AI project selection is about executability and impact. People talk about crawl, walk, run. It's no time for crawl, walk, run. So, but understanding if you have the data and understanding that it has massive impact, it's with your subject expertise is probably the most important for project selection. We started working in AI in 2017, which was the evangelical era, to show people and explain to people what could be done. And at the time, skill sets were almost non-existent. So the CTO office kind of acted as this subject matter expertise nucleation site where we went around to the different groups, then found the executable and high impact programs. That's how we started. Now today, forward to 2024, Gen AI is coming to you with copilots and all the software platforms and business systems you're going to be operating. The dynamic has changed where we have to get AI savvy vocabulary perspectives in almost every functional area of the business. Whether you're writing a proposal, you're doing cost accounting, you're doing engineering, everybody needs to have competencies now in understanding what generative AI is going to be doing for them in these office platforms they're going to be running. So it's a very new day. So it's a mad rush. So I guess some things I'd say lessons learned are don't wait, add new talent right away. I'm so impressed with the quality of what young graduates can do. Undergraduate, comp sci, math, electrical engineering people trained in signal processing, they're adding incredible value 6 months after they're on the deck. So I started learning AI in 2017 when I was in my late 50s. And they're coming out of school with expert skills and moving so fast. They're moving mountains for us. I also think AI is about execution and vision. And organizations have to become extroverted to know what's going on. The models change so fast. The hyperscalers are doing so much. Now we're at 60 exaflop services for Grace Hopper chips in Amazon. So the compute, the model opportunities, the Amazon Q platform to connect us to our back office systems are so disruptive that you got to be extroverted to stay at pace with what's happening in industry. But the big thing, I think Dr. Martell pointed out, it's data, data, data. Know what data you need, know what data you got, know what data has the signals in it. Every organization has to transform and really get on top of its data. Although every minute you don't start with that, you're getting behind. And then you have to do some infrastructure changing. You need a sandbox where data scientists can explore data safely, have access to data, break the access problem for them, because the IT departments have to, kind of enable that infrastructure for it to work. But then after that, there's the data sharing challenge, and the data sharing problem comes after, will come out of the sandbox and how you actually will deploy these models into their service. And then Dr. Martell commented on, and I'll follow up with, AI is a new concept of thinking for a business operation. Data drift and model drift must constantly be surveilled, and we all know about the discipline required between separating training, testing, and validation data sets. So there's a whole new data strategy that a set of professionals are going to have to do in the enterprise. Setting that up from a cold start is not for the squeamish. So you're going to need a transformation leader who understands both business and the tech, and your CTO and CIO are going to have to be blood brothers and have each other's home phone numbers, because there's going to be so much chaos in the first 6 months. So anyway, those are some, I think, some launch projects and launch perspectives that we had. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So one thing I remember Dr. Peter Coffey, the AI scientist from Salesforce, said is that data is being created for humans to consume today. It was never intended for the computer to consume back, right? So we were like, anything that we outputted, it was for our consumption as a report or a table or something like that. But now we are trying to ingest it back into the machine for it to learn so that it can make predictions for us, right? So as we design new systems, we need to start thinking about that and see how can that data be automatically be ingested and be ready for training, right? Todd mentioned about it's all about data, and Dr. Martell talked about it as well. At the same time, you got to understand, and Todd, I'll disagree with you on this, on the crawl, walk, run, right? Like, a lot of pilots, a customer starts pilot thinking that they're going to achieve like nirvana from like, project one, but they don't understand the basics of it, and they fail at the first attempt, and they think AI is not for them, and then they close shop, or they kind of like, oh, we'll put this on pause, let it mature. So we advise customers to like, hey, try this one, pilot, set some basic metrics for measurement, like KPIs. What is this, what value are you trying to drive out of it, right? Setting that metric really low and achieving that, and then slowly expanding from there, and then you can expect exponential growth from there from a results perspective. That's basically what we recommend our customers to do, right? And then having to understand that an AI system is a non-deterministic system. Very clearly, it is, if you ask an AI system what is 2 plus 2, it's going to say, I'm 96% certain that it is 4. It'll never say 100%. Like having an understanding of that and going with an open mind into AI projects is what is going to help customers succeed. Back to you, John.
Yeah, I think so I think that's a good balance of opinions that we want to have, right? Because like Todd mentioned, there's no time for crawl, walk, run, right? Especially if you want to not be left behind in how quickly things are changing. And this came up in the healthcare panel yesterday, but everybody wants to be able to move faster and faster when it comes to integrating AI. But would you have any advice on how to vet new AI-based technologies, when it's proposed to you, or when you hear about it, or when one of those hot new graduates comes and tries to, get you guys to download the latest language model? How do you vet that in your organization? We'll start with Leslie.
Yeah, so we actually see a lot of companies come in that want to kind of get their technology in front of SOCOM, and one of the forums that we have is called Tech Tuesday. It's a virtual forum where companies can pitch to a government-only audience. I would say at least a quarter, probably up to a third of those companies are AI-related technologies. And so the questions that we ask them, and I have technical experts in the room with me that can ask those great zeros and one questions while I'm asking kind of more application. But number one is, where are you getting your data from? Number two is, what kind of data can you incorporate into your models or bring into your system? Is it structured, unstructured? So take those things into consideration in terms of like what you want to apply this AI to. How do you build your models? How do you validate your models? How much data do you need to build and validate those models? If we have a new data set that we want to incorporate, do you have a connector or an API for those? If not, how long will it take you to build and get permission to access that data and build the connector? Again, I think a lot of the data within Department of Defense is restricted, some for good reason, some may be, over conservative, but a lot of those things are really important to building those models. And then the cost, right? How much does it cost when we want you to build a new model, and how fast can you do it? Especially for the operators, that are out there executing the mission, how quickly can we do that? Can you do it, does it have to be on-prem? Can you do it on the edge? What kind of, hardware do you have to support both on-prem and the edge? For special operations, on the edge, they want small things that have high energy density that can be, carried around by humans, not necessarily in a big data center. So those are the things that we kind of ask the companies that are coming in.
Does have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so actually I went through the SOFWERX program, and I've been in Tampa for like 2.5 years, and the first person that I met was Leslie, and the SOFWERX team has been extremely helpful in guiding Latent AI through our process, and we are working with SOCOM and other units as well, right? The key thing as we talk about it, right, like the form factor is always critical from whatever use case that you're going after. Is it going to be an expensive undertaking And as Dr. Martel mentioned, right, like what is the economic outcome that you're going to drive towards? Right? I don't want to spend $120 to get a $20 benefit, right? Today, I'm just pulling in the LLM stick more, right? OpenAI's revenue stream of like $20 per user, for that $20 that they gain, they're spending about $80 to $100 in compute time, right? Money was easy until now, and maybe for OpenAI it's still easy, but that is not applicable for every other customer, including the US government. Right? You can't spend that kind of money in trying to achieve something, right? So those are critical components that you need to think about.
I want to shift focus a little bit to something else that I think is also very important to industry, intellectual property, right? That's, I think, central to making a lot of industry work. And generative AI is really upending this world, right, of IP, everything from plagiarism, ownership of creative works. What is the nature of creativity, right? So we'll start with Peter. How have you seen generative AI affect industry? And what are your biggest concerns with respect to that?
So there are two different types of issues that are highly important in the intellectual property area. The first one is whether we can use copyrighted works for training AI systems. And we have seen a lot of litigation going on. We also have seen other countries trying to have new regulation and trying to address that type of issue. I think the difficulty is that as much as we want to have strong protection of intellectual property rights, we also need to be conscious of the fact that it can be very expensive to acquire all the different data to train the systems. So think about it from the national security perspective, just like in this conference, or from education, or from other perspective, right? So how can we actually strike a good balance between how much we need to compensate the rights holders, and we need to make sure that we got the proper permission, with how much we can actually increase our competitive edge and to develop the strongest technology possible. And this is a very difficult balance to strike. And so I think a lot of the ongoing discussion about both regulation as well as the lawsuits will help us try to strike the good balance in terms of how we can actually make sure that the rights holders will be properly compensated and the permission will be secured. But at the same time, we also can continue to move forward with the technology. We have seen something similar with respect to internet development. There's a point where we actually have to decide whether we need to create a safe harbor, for example, for internet service providers, so that we can advance the technology, right? That is the debate that we are now having with respect to artificial intelligence. The second issue I think that will come up quite a bit is about whether we should actually offer any protection for computer-generated or AI-generated content. We have been thinking about, so in the last 2 days, we've been talking a lot about augmentation, right? So the idea is that while we're actually using AI to augment what we are creating, but not necessarily creating on its own. And that's actually the position that's been taken by our Copyright Office, our USPTO, as well as in many agencies in the world, that any work that is autonomous generated by AI will not be protected. The concern, I think, for a lot of the creators, including those from the game industry, from Hollywood, is that what if we are using AI to augment our creative process, and yet it has been considered as AI generated, right? They do not want to spend all this effort creating something using AI and yet not getting protection at all. And then the difficulty is where do you strike the line between what is considered as AI generated and what is considered as AI augmented? Is it easy to do it, and can we still do it with the current advances in the AI technology? And so I think that is going to be quite complicated as well. And on top of that, I would add that other countries, for example, China, is now offering protection to AI-generated work. They're not recognizing AI as an author or a co-author, but they are offering protection to AI-generated work. Then the big question for us will be, are we going to do something similar, or are we going to continue with our current approach to not offer any protection to AI-generated work? The biggest concern I have with respect to regulation in this area is that we are looking too narrowly, just focusing on intellectual property issues and not think about bigger issues like employment, national security, privacy, and other things. But my biggest fear is that we're actually asking IP regulation to do too much, so that we fold all this issue about national security, privacy, employment, job displacement, everything into whatever legislation we can find. And if IP is the way to go, we just fold all of them together. And that's actually my biggest fear.
Well, yeah, so I mean, if we do zoom out and focus on what the regulatory landscape is going to look like for AI, yeah, we're all trying to figure that out, right? And I think a lot of industry is probably understandably nervous about this. What are your thoughts on how regulation of AI will or should be approached? Let's start with Jags.
So we are actually dealing with this very subject in our Commission on Software-Defined Warfare. Army has this Project Linchpin, which is the key component for all of AI work that the US Army is going to do. And the question comes is like, okay, if I buy, let's say, a model from company A, and company B then comes in with more data for that to augment it, and they retrain the model, and then the company C then goes and deploys it for some tactical use case, and something goes wrong. Who's to blame? Who owns the IP? Where? All those questions are still being asked, and we have no idea what those answers are, right? So, from my perspective, I think we need to go in with a complete open eye and not be too strict in our regulations. Learn step by step and then start to regulate from there rather than going 100% regulation from day one. So.
Agree. Anybody else have any thoughts on regulations?
Well, I have a question perhaps for Peter. Do you see a day where all generative AI are going to produced goods will be digitally watermarked, such that they'll be demarcated and easily identified?
So we have been trying to provide legislation about digital rights management for a long time, right? So we have provision on rights management information in the DMCA way back in 1998. We have been continually focusing on whether to add watermark. I know, for example, some countries have already adopted legislation requiring watermark to be attached to AI-generated work. The difficulty is that watermark can be removed. And so when people are using the data where the watermark has been removed for training purposes, that becomes quite difficult for any AI developers to actually figure out where it is coming from, right? So I think that's going to be an ongoing issue, because I think a lot of the rights holders will want to make sure that there will be a watermark to make sure that their work will not be trained or in jurisdiction where they actually provide for any opt-out mechanism that allow the authors to opt out from the training process. They will want to have a watermark or at least some metadata to indicate where it's coming from. But we face some of the challenges. And going back to John's question, I think we are in a political climate where we actually have a tough time getting through very big legislation on AI in general, right? So anything that is more detailed, that's more specific, tends to have a bigger chance of achieving, whether it's at the domestic level or whether it's at the international level. And I think if we are trying to, and I agree with Jax in terms of like, we should do the step-by-step incremental approach. I think we are going for any legislation, obviously, it won't happen very soon, especially with the election coming up. But any time we want to push through legislation, I think the more targeted, the more specific you can find, the bigger chance of success you have.
Yeah, just have a general comment. So obviously, Department of Defense has pushed out their policy and their ethics for AI initially. And so I think one of the keys for that is just to communicate very clearly what those are and open the lanes up for discussion, because this is a quickly changing landscape, and they have to be willing to take a look at that and update and modify that policy based on what we're learning in industry and, in terms of, engaging with other countries out there as well and how they're treating AI. So again, it's got to be that constant communication and two-way street and open-mindedness to take another look at it.
There is this fear whenever we bring up the topic of regulation with AI that it's gonna just hamstring us in our ability to adapt and innovate right quickly, and that'll make us lose our competitive advantage. So, do you have any insight on how say the EU or China are doing it, and that we might learn from, or learn what not to do based on what they're doing?
So right now, the EU is proposing an AI Act where the focus will be on transparency. And I know some of the colleagues from like Sweden and Finland are here. They are in a much better position to talk about what's going on there. But I think it's going to be difficult because the transparency-based model works very well with personal data. It works much less effectively with respect to the use of, for example, copyrighted works for training purposes. Because the copyrighted works are not residing within the system after it has been trained. So then you cannot use the same approach to say you need to disclose what's included, or you need to remove some of the content after the authors or the rights holders have opted out. Basically, you have to retrain the system, and then you also run into issues about what if the AI developers have been using multiple parties to help out with the training process. Think of it as a supply chain with many different parties. Then what type of obligations would you have? Do you know exactly whether the content is actually coming from the sources that have already been cleared? Do you actually have done the due diligence to make sure that you can do that? So there will be a lot of different issues that will come up, and I think that goes to your point about how we actually fear that any approach in that direction will actually stifle some of the technological development here. Then, of course, you also have issues with respect to countries like China, who are actually developing a lot of AI regulation. China is very eager to find ways to become a leader, and we've been talking about the AI race for the last 2 days between US and China. And so I think that is going to be quite interesting to see where China is going. At the moment, the regulations are not that clear in terms of how they're going to address a lot of the, for example, the training process with respect to generative AI. And so it'll be interesting to see what is emerging. And then, of course, we also have our own approach, and we have a different political system in terms of how industry can provide input into the legislative process. And so I think it's going to be difficult to try and figure out what type of model we want to have both globally as well as domestically, in part because we don't know exactly whether it's a much better way for us to actually harmonize our current standards with other countries, or whether we actually take a very different approach so that we can maintain a competitive edge. And I think that is still being played out probably it will be in the next year or two before we actually have some idea as to what would be a much better approach.
I thought the presidential order was good. It balanced enablement with governance with equal priority. I thought it was also a great message to the whole of government that has to radically maneuver to become competent in this revolution that's going on. I mean, world influence is at stake, and there's two systems. If you haven't read Kai-Fu Lee's book, AI Superpowers, I'm guessing most people in this room have read it. If you haven't, you really will enjoy it. I think it sets the table and why the presidential order and regulation is such a delicate situation, because enablement is as much as important as governance. Yeah,
that I think just to add on to that, I think Stanford regulation group, they tried to see how much of the the orders were actually followed after the presidential order by different governmental organizations, and I think the result that they found was pretty negative. Most organizations didn't actually meet the timelines that the order followed. So Yeah, maybe it's just the implementation is much more difficult than the dream, right? Shift focus a little bit to another topic of interest to industry is jobs, right? There's of course the worry that AI is either going to take all our jobs or make it so that our jobs are too easy and we don't have to do any work, right? So looking at the current landscape of jobs, personnel costs, the way in which the types and availability of jobs is going to shift significantly or already has in your various industries. What changes have you seen? What do you predict will happen in the short term? And probably more importantly, if some categories of jobs are going to be severely reduced or eliminated entirely, can we always count on it being the case that there will be enough jobs to replace them? Anybody want to tackle that?
Well, this is an interesting topic to me too. I get asked it a lot. I encourage people to watch the Microsoft Copilot video on YouTube. I think every professional out there, regardless of your discipline, is going to have the expectation within 3 years that you're competent to use a Copilot in doing what you do. Those companies that have Copilot effective professionals will win. Those that don't will progressively atrophy. So, Kai-Fu Lee's book and a lot of academics state 40% of human jobs are replaceable by AI in the next 10 years. That's really scary. The socioeconomic impact of that would be severe. So I think humans one thing we are is that we're a resilient bunch. We communicate well, and I think we'll use AI to accelerate communication, accelerate research. I was just blown away at how generative AI models now are being used to suggest or infer next topics in research. Big Pharma has built a molecular database, and Gen AI is helping it develop 18 more medicines per year than they were previously. And I think there's a couple national labs that have put all of the research of entire scientific topics into a model, and it's inferring next generation research suggestions, and the humans on the loop are extraordinarily pleased with the outcomes. So I think we're just going to get faster, smarter, leaner, more efficient, greener, and the world's going to get smaller. It keeps getting smaller. So I don't think humanity's at risk, but I think there's going to be a lot of tectonic events. And if your economy has not been keeping up, you're going to suffer. So there could be a global a computational world and a less computational world that emerges in 10 to 20 years. That's I think what keeps me up at night.
So, I draw a parallel to the switchboard employees back in the day, right? When telephonic invention happened, there were women sitting in front of switchboards connecting calls, right? Technological advancement made that job redundant. Nobody is complaining about that they lost their telephone switching job. But the problem with AI is that the speed of innovation, the rapid acceptance and adoption of the technology is I've never seen before at this scale, right? So that's why we as humans have always adopted to technological changes, from horse-driven bogies to automobiles to telephone switching to automatic phone connections and stuff. Today the problem is that rapid switching, rapid adoption of technology. I think Vinod Khosla said last year that 80% jobs will be automated through AI. So can we make jobs be done faster? For example, one of the use cases that we are looking at right now is when you go to a radiology test, right? Today, the attendant right there at the machine actually can read the results, but will never tell you what it is because of whatever obligations and stuff. But that result goes in a queue for the radiologist to look at. What if we are able to run AI and the AI is basically going to prioritize, hey doc, this particular result looks you need more attention to it or it needs priority care. So I'm going to bump that up in the queue rather than in a first in, first out manner. So that actually accelerates the time to care. It's not eliminating anybody's job, but you can do more with less, right? So that's kind of like, I'm a glass full guy, half full guy, so optimistic about it. So that's the way I would look at it.
So what I tell my students is, if you actually know more about technology or know more about algorithm, you'll be much better off as a lawyer, right? So this is actually surprising to a lot of students at law school because that's not why they get into law school, and that's actually not what they're thinking about. So for those of you who are doing computer science, doing engineering, law school is good for you right now because it's very attractive, obviously. This is the advertisement for law school education. But think about it this way. In the future, most of the legal system will be a hybrid arrangement between both human decision makers as well as algorithms and machines. And so any lawyers who need to function well will need to know exactly the interface between the law and technology. And without knowing a lot about technology or knowing even how the algorithm will work, it will be very hard to help your clients, right? So it will be very important. I think I agree with what Todd was talking about Copilot earlier. Yesterday, we had a future sensing session where we actually talk. One participant talks about the fact that you can actually convert your entire paper into a PowerPoint within 15 minutes, right? The biggest worries for us is that, well, you can actually create a contract from very beginning to end very quickly. Now, that doesn't mean that a lot of our students will be unemployed because we still need external validators to figure out whether you're omitting certain things. You need to check it. But the number of lawyers being hired will be very different if we actually can have the first draft, second draft to be done before we actually bring in people checking the contracts. And there's also a very interesting ongoing discussion for those of us in law school is whether the contract drafted by an AI tool will be actually better than a first-year associate. If that is the case, then you still want people to have more experience as a second or third-year associate. But at the same time, a lot of the recent graduates will have a tough time finding jobs because AI can actually do a much better job as drafting contract or doing other things before you get to people who have more experience.
We've been struggling with this question in education as well because, coming from a computer science department, we're just used to telling people, oh yeah, you're worried about, your job being lost to automation, just learn how to program, right? And now, prominent people in the industry are actually saying things like, don't teach people how to program anymore, right? Or don't make it a core skill, right? So
math is cool again.
Math is cool again, yeah. Paper exams, I give them in class now all the time. And we have to struggle with this question now of what do we actually teach them that will benefit them that won't just be changed by the next wave of automation, right? Maybe one way that we can answer that, and I'll pass this on to all of you, is how can we better supply your industries and just the emerging tech community in this area in general with the graduates with the kinds of skill sets you're looking for?
I'll start, right?
Sure.
Data, right? Coming back to data, right? I think Cisco published a stat many years ago. The entirety of internet was 22 exabytes in 2002. In 2020, we were producing that data, that much amount of data every 4 hours. Can you believe what that number would be today? And I think every student is a producer and consumer of data in heavy amounts, right? So understanding that relationship of data is a critical foundational knowledge for every student that's graduating out. And then the second part, right, I'm going to be very selfish here from a latent AI perspective. We make AI models small enough and compile them to run on different hardware targets, right? So basically, latent AI, you want AI to be latent everywhere. It needs to be running everywhere. So for that, you need to have some core technological chops in terms of embedded computing and stuff. You know how difficult it is to find somebody with a C++ experience today? So personal ask is that, if you, focus on C++ and embedded computing, there is a whole world of opportunities waiting for you. Todd?
Yeah, I would add the highest performing project outcomes we've routinely have achieved have been when I combine a phenomenologist with a computationally efficient developer, right? So the double E's understand, and the physicists understand phenomenology, where the signals are likely to be, the interpretation of those signals, and will help validate the algorithms to extract those signals, but the computer scientists, the data scientists will make sure that it's computationally efficient, right? It's that winning combination, it's that blend. If you left it to one of them, you'd get no signals and a very efficient code. And if you went the other direction, you'd have an exquisite algorithm that couldn't compile well. So it's that blend, I think, that we find is matching people together. So there's always going to be room for phenomenologists at the core of it.
I would say most important, right, voice of the customer. So you're listening to a couple of industry folks here, and there's the very specific engineering or zeros and ones kind of skill sets. You also have to take into account the human factors, how you're going to apply those, and understand what comes out of that. At the end of the day, so I think one of my biggest worries, to be honest with you, is our generation, we are used to, well, hopefully most of us have those critical and creative thinking skills that we were taught, either in school or, on the job. A lot of the students today, I'm not sure, are going to be able to distinguish, unless we continue to teach that AI should be augmenting those critical and creative thinking skills. We cannot lose the sight of being able to teach those. It shouldn't replace it. But a lot of the kids, they're coming up with ChatGPT. It can write the report for me. Well, does your report make sense? Does this have any common sense? Does this have any application whatsoever? So I believe we still have to keep the balance of those technical skills. And people can learn skills. There should be retraining programs at companies too, when those traditional jobs go away and they're going to be doing something differently, to retrain those folks to be able to do that or bring in some new ones. But again, you've got to keep that balance between the hardware and the humans. One of the number one soft truth is humans are more important than hardware. And I will always believe that, because the tool is only as good as the people that are trained to use it. Again, you're going to have the people that develop it and the people that apply it. And if you don't have a good combination of those, I think that's when we fail.
Yeah, one thing we need to think a little bit more about is how to create an educational environment that will allow students to get the best out of that environment, right? We tend to have a top-down approach where professors have to teach the students what type of technology they need to use, what type of technical skills they have. And yet we in an environment where students actually can play with multiple AI tools and they'll acquire this skill set even more quickly than the professors, right? So I think it'll be important for us to actually think about how to actually have give and take between the students to actually see what type of technology they can use. And for those technology they can learn on their own, I actually don't think the professors can be more effectively teaching them, right? So our role will be guiding them as to what type of technology will be useful, what type of questions we should be asking, what type of pitfalls we need to be aware of. And I think that will be important. The other thing I would bring up is from some conversations from yesterday about how important is humanities. Whenever we think about AI, it's really about humans, about human condition, right? The more we actually understand the non-technical aspects, the more we are more informed about ethical issues, about what type of regulatory issues we have to address. And so I think it's very important for us to have a broad-based approach to trying to figure out how to move forward.
I think often, this skill set that you all have mentioned it often goes under critical thinking, but also data literacy, media literacy, right? And the education, colleges are definitely focusing on that and try to make it a priority. And I think one thing that we're trying to do is figure out how early we need to integrate this kind of education into the curriculum, right? My my kindergarten son mentioned last week that he had an AI club, and they had an activity for it. And I asked what he was doing, and he said, "Oh yeah, I have these markers, and we're coloring this thing." That's not. Is that AI? That's just coloring, right? But then he described, "Oh no, they take it and then they have a computer scan it and display it on the screen or something." I don't know. Kindergartners aren't the most reliable narrators, but that I guess it's just exposure to these technologies is sufficient as a way to start. Yeah. But I want to ask you all a difficult question, if that's okay. So just kind of rewind a little bit and talk about the jobs changes that are going to happen. And we already kind of hinted at the idea that skill sets are going to change rapidly. We kind of don't know what to anticipate, right? But with every technological change that we've had in the history of our species, we've kind of had this idea that, well, there's some other thing that we can adapt to once this skill set is no longer as needed, right? How does that change when we have a technology that is in practice, and AI is not at this stage yet, but in practice at human level of capabilities, right? Where everything that humans can adapt to have a new job is something that the AI or AGI can do already. Is that something that any of you have thought of and how it would impact your industry? Or yeah.
Oh, I like to think it's throughput. I mean, I like to think we can double the quantity of submarines and carriers we overhaul and mission solutions we develop versus time. It's just getting more productivity with the quantity of human capital I have now, right? Yes, there's a training, there is a new set of skills and upgrading efforts we have to make, but inherently our subject expert force, our technologists, our trades, I can get more out of that current force. So it's just going to be good. It's going to lift our company and the nation's defense with that efficiency, those gains. I like to think of it in that context.
So I think the underlying question is AGI possible in any time soon? I personally believe I don't think so. I don't think it'll happen to the way of replacing a human being for all intents and purposes. I don't think that's going to happen in my lifetime, at least. I think. But as Todd was saying, most aspects of a human job can be replaced and can be enhanced by an AI system, right? What makes a human is our five senses plus that sixth sense of reasoning. I don't think AI will get to that sixth sense, but can individual systems master those individual five senses? We know, we talked about it, John, computer vision today is 80% of all AI use cases. That's one sense that has been over dominating everything else. My previous company that I sold had automated human hearing. The way we had positioned in the market was for predictive maintenance, and it was basically capturing the aging populations, the technician that would just go listen to machine and tell whether the machine is working well or not, right? We were able to capture that intelligence into a system, right? That's another sense, right? So things like this, you can keep adding sensory modalities into a system and make it more intelligent, but getting to that reasoning and putting it all together, I don't think it's going to happen, in my opinion, anytime soon.
Well, I draw inspiration from sci-fi, and when I look at, if you watch some of the Star Wars series, you'll see they have human-level AI and human-level robots, right, that can walk around, but they still have human beings as security guards watching the screens, right? And they can distract them, and then someone sneaks by, right? So I wonder if I know it's just science fiction, but I wonder if it's an indicator that even when we do have the technology that can do certain tasks better than humans can, that there's still going to be a lot of resistance and just a preference to have a human behind the wheel, right? Have you seen this in any of your industries? There's this well-known pilot effect, right? Where even though in a lot of cases, an autopilot can fly a plane better than a human pilot, people will prefer to have a human pilot or to think that there's a human pilot behind the wheel just because they feel safer. Have you seen that kind of resistance to AI adoption in your industries?
I'm
Can I
guessing
just
you're
say
all
real
about
quick?
lethality.
Yeah.
You're all about lethality. I'll let you answer.
Yeah, I would say autopilot's great if all your systems are running really well, but when you lose an engine or hydraulics are out, I'm not sure how well the autopilot's going to correct that emergency and execute the procedure. So I think to some extent, yes, it's nice to have automated things, but in terms of risk culture and people allowing those things to, ensure that a whole, tube of people in an airplane get from one location to another, and assuming everything's going to go smoothly, I think people are still very comfortable with having a human in the loop. Might be different with cargo. I think maybe UPS or FedEx, maybe it's something different when you're hauling boxes versus humans. But again, I think it's good when everything's going smoothly, but when you have emergencies and things don't go as planned, I think people are much more comfortable with having the human in the loop to handle that.
Here I go with time again. Humans don't perform well when time compresses radically. Today, AI beats top pilots in aerial combat. Eventually, a human will make a spatial interpretation mistake, and the AI won't. A CIC, when in a very complex air, surface, and subsurface environment, can't keep up with the complexities spatially and dynamically, and systems have to augment humans. So, and hypersonics are changing the world, as we know. The time to act, humans on the loop can be very problematic. So, so time, again, in those very, very compressed situations, very complex spatially situations, humans don't scale. Putting 5 people in the CIC or 20 doesn't make the command decisions get better because of the time problem. But so I think it's a balance. We'll be in the loop when we have to, and we'll be out of the loop when we can't, when we have to be as well. We'll have to engineer those systems and hopefully not get in too many of those conditions.
I can probably add an analog use case here, right? Worked with a quick service restaurant, a fast food restaurant, right? So they were monitoring when the food comes out of the fryer and how long it stays on the tray. As simple as that, right? Like they have a quality standard of the food can only stay X amount of minutes in the tray before it goes to trash. Because after that, the quality sucks, quality fails, right? Now, there is automation involved in this and they're using AI to identify this. Still, the restaurant folks do not want to listen to the system completely because the quality matters to them so much that it is ingrained in their DNA. They have timers running on their watches. Everybody has a digital watch that they run and they check this. So going from high tech to low tech. So
Yeah, there's a big part of that. I guess not only that we want the human in the loop, even when we know the AI can do well for backup purposes, but I wonder how much of that is that we need someone to blame if things go wrong, right? I wonder. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. It's just a passing thought.
Well, there's always a social dimension of a lot of the issues we talk about, right? So do you want to have a case decided by a machine, or do you want to have a case decided by human judge? Then you go into issues about what do we want in a democratic society? What do we want for rule of law, right? Even if we know that the machine will give you higher accuracy and consistency, predictability, right? You might still want to have a human person to actually make a decision, not necessarily just because of accountability or who to blame, right? But also because we believe that it's much better in our society to actually have somebody who has been elected or who has been appointed to actually make the decision, right? So we might go in that direction. I think going to Jags and also what Todd talked about earlier is that it's going to be challenging for humans to figure out when machines are actually making better decisions. And there are a lot of times where machines make better decisions, and yet it do not coincide with human decisions or intuition. And humans always doubt whether this is actually correct or not. And the more human decision makers are trying to correct those decisions, the less useful AI will be because they're actually making better decisions, right? So that's always the dilemma, right? Do you going to have human in the loop to actually intervene, thinking that the machine was wrong when it was actually right?
Yeah.
Or do you actually just let the machines do the job and then give up your ability to actually intervene? That's a dilemma.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point, Peter. How many of you use Waze for directions, right? I know where I'm going. You guys know where I'm going with this, right? Like, Waze will give you a direction that is a faster route to wherever you're going. But guess what? We overpower that and say, oh, I know a better path, and I know this is the way we're going, right?
Yep.
Just simple things.
I never jot Waze.
I was just thinking about that too while Peter was talking, because my dad's generation, they just refuse, right? They say, no matter how much you tell them, no, it has live data about traffic situations, they can adapt that. They say, yeah, but I've been driving in this city for 50 years or whatever, right? And I wonder how much of that is just the value that we've grown up with, right? This balance between how much we trust our own intuition and the technology. And maybe the follow-up question there is, if you imagine the current generation of young children who will have grown up with incredibly capable AI systems, maybe even AI best friends, right? When they grow up and they're the ones that have to make the decisions, are they going to be just much more willing to accept AI overlords or, AI judges? Anyway, something to think about, something to be scared of, I guess. All right, well, just to close, let me ask you all another controversial question for all four of you. So think about, and Jags already mentioned his view on this, but the possibility of fully human-level AI and superhuman-level AI. I'm taking bets on whether you think they're possible, and if so, how long, and is your industry ready for it? And Jags, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll start, right? So, let's think about evolution in itself, right? Like, I think human beings are at the peak of nature's evolution. The next step of the evolution is going to be cybernetics, right? And we've already seen this with Neuralink, right? Like what Elon has created with Neuralink, implants that are going to help you become better. And, right now it's more about solving some chronic issues, but then that's going to evolve into more of like that superhuman nature. So our next level of evolution is going to be that superhuman. It is not going to be just machine. It's going to be part organic and part inorganic. That's where I'll put my bet on.
Okay.
Peter.
So I would say it's possible. I'm not going to provide a number of years because every predictions I've read is basically wrong, right? So, but I would say benchmarking will be important, right? We have a long time talking about using a Turing test to determine whether it's actually machines can have the same capability as humans. We now look at generative AI, right? We cannot distinguish what's been created by a human creator and an AI tool, and yet we still know that we don't have like super AI or AGI or something like that, right? So then the question is, well, are we going to change the benchmark in determining whether we reach the point that John was asking the question? And I suspect we'll keep on changing the benchmarking to the point that it will be actually quite difficult for us to answer that question.
So we went from a large language model with 1 billion nodes to GPT-4 with 2 trillion nodes. And if you plot it over time, we were within 5 years of getting to 100 trillion nodes, which should harness and feed all of human intelligence. My question is, what do we do with that? What do we do with that? But we're on a course to change history in 5 years, and the question is, what do we do with it? Maybe we should ask Elon Musk. He was pretty vocal about this a few years ago, but it's very interesting. It's exciting to watch.
I guess to me, it's kind of more of a concern about resources, right? So we're going to have superhumans, maybe, AI-enabled humans, but there are limited resources on this earth to sustain that. And so how long can that actually be sustained? Obviously, there'll probably be, a little more space exploration and finding resources not on this planet, but I think it's a balance of the resources to sustain this. What's going to last longer?
Well, thank you all very much. With that, we're at time, so I want to thank our esteemed panelists for this fascinating discussion. Thank you all very much.